The Cavendish Gala was the kind of event I'd spent 3 years photographing for other people. I know that sounds like a cliché. Girl from a small town watches the rich laugh and drink and forget she exists. But it wasn't like that. Or at least, it didn't feel that way on the night it happened. I was there because the Vancouver Art Foundation had hired me to document their annual fundraiser, the one that fills half a page in the society section of the Globe and Mail every November. I had my Nikon around my neck, a half-eaten granola bar in my jacket pocket, and absolutely no business being anywhere near the man I ended up talking to for 4 hours. His name was Stellan Vard. I didn't know that at first. I just knew he was standing alone near the window overlooking False Creek, holding a glass of something amber, and that every person in the room kept glancing at him the way you glance at a storm moving in from the water. Aware, careful, not quite ready to look away. I photographed him without thinking about it. That's the honest truth. I lifted my camera, adjusted the aperture, and caught him mid-exhale, the city lights blurring behind him like a watercolor that hadn't dried. It was a good shot. I knew it the moment I took it. What I didn't know was that he'd seen me. You going to ask permission, or just keep collecting evidence? I lowered the camera. He was looking at me now, not at the room, not at the water, at me, and I felt the specific kind of embarrassment that doesn't come from doing something wrong, but from being caught doing something true. It's a public event, I said. Technically, you signed a media release when you bought your ticket, did I? Not a question, probably. Your assistant probably signed it. Same thing. Something shifted in his expression, not quite a smile, more like the idea of one held just out of reach. You do this often? He asked. Talk back to men twice your size at charity galas? When they sneak up on me, I extended my hand. Petra. I stopped. I never use my last name. Old habit. Just Petra. Stellan, he said, and shook it. I remember thinking his hand was cold. I remember the cufflinks, brushed silver, no insignia, the kind of restraint that costs more than showing off would. I remember that the string quartet switched to something I couldn't name, and that someone across the room laughed too loudly, and that none of it seemed to matter quite as much as it had 60 seconds ago. That was October. By November, I was standing in a kitchen that wasn't mine, wearing a robe that wasn't mine, holding a coffee mug I'd never seen before in my life, while a man I barely knew told me that I had, apparently, agreed to marry him. I want to be clear about something before I get into that part. I am not the kind of woman things happen to. I am the kind of woman who plans, who reads the fine print, who calls her mother every Sunday and keeps a running list of things she needs to do before the end of the fiscal year. I grew up in Nanaimo. I know how to parallel park in a snowstorm. I do not wake up in penthouses in Cole Harbor, with a stranger's dog sleeping on my feet and a blank space, where the last 6 hours of my memory should be. And yet, the dog's name was Pudding. I know that, because it was the first thing I asked when I came downstairs, and found the golden retriever blocking the kitchen doorway with the confidence of a creature who had never once been told no. Pudding, said the woman standing at the stove, 50s, silver-streaked bun, the kind of posture that suggested she'd been hired by someone with extremely specific standards. Sit. Pudding sat. I wished I had that kind of authority over my own morning. Mr. Vard is in his study, the woman said, without turning around. He asked that you join him when you're ready. I looked down at the robe. Thick cotton, monogrammed SV, smelling of cedar and something clean I couldn't identify. I need my clothes. Your clothes are being laundered. There are things in the guest room if you need them. My things or appropriate things, she said, in a tone that closed the conversation entirely. Her name, I later learned, was Mrs. Bellamy, and she had worked for Stellan Vard for 11 years, and she had the specific, unshakable composure of someone who had seen considerably stranger mornings than this one. I found Stellan in a room full of bookshelves and morning light, sitting behind a desk that looked like it had been imported from somewhere with a longer history than British Columbia. He was on the phone. He held up one finger when he saw me. Wait, and I stood there in his robe with his dog now pressing its whole warm weight against my leg, and I thought, I don't know this man, I don't know this room, I don't know why I'm here. He ended the call. You look better, he said. I look like I'm wearing your bathrobe. You are wearing my bathrobe, Stellan. I sat down across from him because my legs were doing something uncertain. What happened last night? He was quiet for a moment in the way that people are quiet when they're deciding how much of the truth is useful. "You don't remember," he said. "I remember the gala. I remember talking to you. I remember a jazz bar, the smell of rain on Granville Street, a cab that may or may not have been an Uber. Fragments. You remember agreeing to have dinner with me. I remember you suggesting dinner and me thinking it was a terrible idea. And then I'm here." I looked at Pudding, who looked back at me with large, sympathetic eyes. "Your dog is sitting on my foot. She likes you. She doesn't like most people. Stellan." "Yes. Why did you say?" I stopped. There had been something on the way downstairs, something I'd caught on the edge of hearing Mrs. Bellamy on the phone with someone, and the words had been brief and clipped and I hadn't understood them all, but one phrase had landed clearly. "The arrangement's been confirmed." "What arrangement?" I said. He didn't blink. "You agreed last night to come to the Whistler Summit with me this weekend." I agreed to go to Whistler. As my fiancée. The word landed in the room like something dropped from a considerable height. I set down the coffee mug very carefully. "I need you to repeat that. My family is hosting a business summit at the lodge in Whistler this weekend. I need to attend. My family also needs to believe, for reasons I'll explain if you give me 10 minutes, that I am engaged. You last night, after your second glass of the Okanagan Pinot, thought this was a wonderful idea and agreed to help." I thought. I pressed 2 fingers to my temple. "You're telling me that I, voluntarily, agreed to pretend to be your fiancé at a family business summit. You said, and I'm quoting directly, 'That's actually the most logical solution I've heard all night, and I've heard some genuinely terrible solutions tonight.' I tried very hard to find a version of myself that would say that and failed completely. Then I tried again and found her immediately, because honestly, that did sound exactly like something I would say after 2 glasses of wine when someone presented a problem with a clear structural solution, and I hadn't yet thought through the structural problems with the solution itself. "I must have been very tired," I said. "You were quite lucid, actually. What happens if I say no?" He folded his hands on the desk. "Then you say no, and Mrs. Bellamy calls you a car, and you go home, and I find another way." He paused. "But you'd be very good at it. At pretending to be engaged to a man I've known for 6 weeks. At being present in a room full of people who are trying to read each other, without giving anything away. You did it for 3 hours last night at a table with 4 people who wanted something from me. You were the only person there who didn't. I hadn't realized he'd been watching me that carefully. I should have. I was the photographer. I was used to being the one who watched. It was strange and not entirely comfortable to discover I'd been observed in return. "Tell me the 10 minutes, I said. He told me. Stellan Vard was 41 years old, the eldest of 3 children, and the de facto head of a private infrastructure firm his grandfather had founded in Victoria in 1962. The kind of company that built bridges and hospitals and water treatment facilities, and appeared nowhere on any list that required public disclosure. His family was not old money in the inherited a manor sense. They were old money in the sense that they had been quietly, methodically, extraordinarily good at doing things that needed doing for longer than most people had been paying attention. His mother was arriving in Whistler on Saturday. His younger brother, a man named Torsten, who had, according to Stellan, the financial instincts of a golden retriever and the ambition of someone who had never once been told he wasn't exceptional, had recently begun making decisions that could unravel 20 years of careful work, and the only leverage Stellan had, the only thing that would shift the board's sympathies before the vote on Sunday, was being perceived as settled, stable, the responsible eldest son who had finally stopped putting the company before everything else. "Your brother is trying to take over the company," I said. "My brother is trying to convince the board that I'm too focused on the company to see what the company actually needs. And the company needs not what Torsten is proposing." He said it without heat. That was the thing about Stellan. He didn't perform his feelings. He kept them behind glass, visible if you looked, unreachable if you didn't. And a fiancé fixes this. A fiancé who my mother approves of, and who Torsten can unsettle, and who doesn't need anything from me. Yes, it fixes enough. I looked at Pudding. Pudding thumped her tail once against the hardwood. "What do I get out of this?" I asked. Stellan opened a drawer. He slid a piece of paper across the desk. I didn't look at it. Whatever that number is, I said. I don't want it. He looked at me steadily. What do you want? I thought about my studio on Commercial Drive. The one with the north-facing windows I'd been on a waiting list for since before the pandemic. The one I'd lose in April if I didn't come up with the renewal deposit. I thought about the Arts Council grant I'd applied for twice and hadn't gotten, and the corporate clients I'd been courting without success, and the way I'd felt last night in that room, photographing people who would never remember I'd been there. Access, I said, to your family. Your world. I want to document it, not for publication. You can approve everything I use, wherever I use it. But I want to photograph it. Honestly, the way I photograph everything. He was quiet. You've seen my work, I said. It wasn't a question. He wouldn't have noticed me at all if he hadn't. I've seen your work, he confirmed. Then you know I don't make things prettier than they are. I make them true. And I think... I stopped. What? I think your family is interesting. Whatever happens this weekend. And I think there's a story there worth telling honestly. He looked at me for a long moment. The kind of look that was also a calculation. All right, he said. All right. We go to Whistler, you photograph. I have a fiancé for the weekend. Sunday night, we come back to Vancouver. You return the ring. I have one. It was my grandmother's. It's appropriate. And we go back to our lives. And if your mother asks questions, I'll handle my mother. And if your brother tries to, I'll handle Torsten. He said it the same way both times. Not like a promise. Like a fact about weather. I picked up the paper, folded it in half without reading it, and slid it back across the desk. Keep the money, I said. Just keep the money out of it. For the first time since I'd come downstairs, something in his expression changed in a way I could actually read. It wasn't surprise exactly. It was the look of someone who had prepared for a negotiation and discovered the other person wasn't interested in negotiating. Okay, he said. Pudding put her head in my lap. I have photographed funerals and festivals and the inside of a walnut processing plant in the Okanagan Valley. I once spent 4 days in a fishing lodge outside Haida Gwaii, documenting something that ended up being a very long argument about who owned which boat, which never got published, but which remains some of the best work I've ever done. I thought I understood how to be in a room where the real conversation is happening underneath the visible one. I had never met Astrid Vard. She arrived at the lodge on Saturday afternoon in a dark green coat that probably cost more than my camera equipment, with the kind of posture that made posture seem like a personal philosophy, and she looked at me across the entry hall, with eyes so precisely like her son's that I almost forgot to breathe. So, she said, you're the photographer, not your Petra, not you must be Stellan's fiancé, she knew, of course she knew. She was a woman who had spent 50 years knowing things. Astrid. Stellan's voice beside me, quiet. This is Petra. I know who she is. She crossed the hall and took my hand and held it with both of hers in a grip that was warmer than I expected. I looked you up. Your series on the Fisherman's Wharf families, the one for the BC Arts Foundation. I've been thinking about it for weeks. I did not expect that. Thank you, I said. The one with the woman mending the net at 4 a.m, while her husband slept in the truck. She studied my face. That was about more than fishing. It usually is. Something settled in her eyes. Not approval, more like the suspension of judgment. A door held open. Torsten arrived an hour later with a woman named Gwen, who worked in communications and seemed to spend a lot of energy ensuring that every sentence she said was also a position statement. He was Stellan's height, softer, with the specific energy of someone performing ease, rather than feeling it. He shook my hand with both of his. So you two finally made it official, he said, looking at Stellan. It was time, Stellan said. How long has it been? 6 weeks. He said it lightly, but the landing was deliberate. 8, I said. Torsten turned to me. I smiled. The gala in October, I said. I was there professionally. The foundation hired me to document. He was the most interesting person in the room. That's usually fatal, in my experience. Gwen laughed. Torsten didn't. 8 weeks is fast, he said. So was the Trans-Canada, I said. Some things just need doing. Astrid, across the room, made a sound that might have been a cough, and might have been something else entirely. That night at dinner, I sat next to a board member named Hugh Kavanagh, who had been on the Vard Group's board since the late 90s, and who asked me, after the second course, a perfectly good butter chicken from a chef who had clearly spent time in Toronto. What I made of the whole situation. Which situation? I asked. All of it. He gestured vaguely at the table. The company, the weekend, these dinners. I thought about it honestly. I think families are complicated, and companies are families with more paperwork, and someone is always trying to protect something that everyone else thinks is already safe. He looked at me for a moment. Stellan said you were direct. Stellan exaggerates. He really doesn't. He picked up his wine. He said you were the first person in a long time who looked at a room and saw what was actually happening in it. I didn't know what to do with that. I filed it away next to the other things I was collecting, not in the camera, just in the part of my mind that noted the weight of things. Later, standing on the deck with the mountains dark against a sky that was purple and endless, I heard footsteps on the wood behind me and didn't turn around. "How are you doing?" Stellan said. "I'm fine. You've been photographing all day." "I photograph when I'm processing things." I paused. "It's a problem." "Is it?" "My therapist thinks so." My therapist also has a studio portrait of her cat on her desk, so I've adjusted my confidence in her artistic opinions accordingly. He came to stand beside me, not close enough to be anything in particular, just beside. "Torsten spoke to 2 board members after dinner," he said. "I know, I saw. I'd caught it through the window from outside. Torsten's posture, the tilt of a head. He's good at it, the informality, making it feel like conversation instead of lobbying. He's had practice. Is he wrong about the direction he wants to take the company?" Stellan was quiet. "You can tell me," I said. "I'm not going to use it." "He's not wrong about what the company could be," Stellan said finally. "He's wrong about what it would cost to get there. And he's wrong about who would pay for it. The workers. Some of them. The smaller contractors. The communities that depend on us building things that last 50 years instead of 20. He exhaled. "It's not glamorous. There's no announcement that gets picked up by anyone outside of a trade publication. But there are places in this province where people have clean water because of decisions my grandfather made in 1974, and they don't know his name, and that is..." He stopped. "That's the point," I said. "Yes, you want to protect something invisible. Most important things are." I raised the camera without really deciding to. He didn't move. I took the shot, his profile, the mountains behind him, the lights of the lodge warm in the glass at our backs, and lowered it again. "I'm going to use that one," I said. "I know." We stood there for a while longer. Pudding appeared from inside and sat between us with the authority of a very small furry mediator, and the 3 of us looked at the mountains together until the cold drove us back indoors. Sunday came with frost on the windows and the particular tension of a day that has a deadline in it. The board meeting was informal by design. Astrid's design, I suspected. Coffee and pastries in the lodge's main room, no conference table, everyone in weekend clothes and winter light. I stayed back with my camera, present enough to observe, peripheral enough not to matter, the way I'd learned to be in rooms where the real work was happening. Torsten spoke first. He was good, I'll give him that. He had a presentation that wasn't a presentation. A way of introducing numbers as anecdotes, of making the board feel like they were remembering something they'd always believed, rather than being persuaded of something new. The pivot he was proposing was elegant on the surface. Faster projects, more volume, publicly visible work, the kind of contracts that got you quoted in the Financial Post, growth without the long games. He smiled at me once across the room. I smiled back. When Stellan spoke, he didn't counter-present. He told a story. A water treatment facility outside Prince George, commissioned 2003, still running at capacity. The kind of infrastructure that would have cost 4 times as much to repair if they'd cut corners in the design phase. He named the engineer. He named the project manager. He named the town. "That's not a story about profit margins," Torsten said. "No," Stellan agreed. "It's a story about what we're for." Hugh Kavanagh turned his coffee cup in his hands. Astrid said nothing. She hadn't spoken all morning. She watched the way I watched, and I wondered what she saw. After, when the coffee had gone cold and the board members had dispersed for the drive back to Vancouver, I was packing my camera bag in the corner when I felt her behind me. "You weren't performing," Astrid said. I turned. "Sorry? All weekend, you weren't performing." She tilted her head. "Why not?" I thought about it. I don't photograph things I don't believe, and I don't perform things I don't feel. I paused. This weekend, I wasn't sure what I'd feel when I got here. I thought maybe it would be obvious. Edges, you know? The seams of things. And the seams are there, I said. But so's everything else. She looked at me for a long moment. He's going to miss you, she said quietly, and walked away. I stood there holding my camera bag and tried to decide what to do with that. The drive back to Vancouver was gray and clean, the sea to the right of the highway, the mountains shouldering in from the left. Pudding slept across the back seat with her head in my lap, and I watched the landscape and didn't say anything for a long time. The vote went through, Stellan said finally. I heard Torsten's proposal was tabled, contingent on a review. Good, yes, more silence, the kind that wasn't empty. Your mother knew, I said. She always knows. She wasn't angry. He took a moment. She was curious about what? About you. He kept his eyes on the road. She texted me an hour ago. She wants to know if you'd be interested in documenting a project they're considering in the Kootenays. Something she's working on with a land trust. Photography component. Small grant attached. I looked out the window at the gray sky and the dark water. That's a very tidy resolution, I said. I thought so. Did you arrange it? I suggested it might be something she'd want to ask you about. She made her own decision. I shook my head, not unhappily. You're going to tell me this is all very convenient, he said. It is all very convenient, and yet. I looked down at Pudding, who was dreaming something that involved her feet. You could have found someone easier for this weekend. Someone who needed the money, who would have played the part and gone home. Yes. Why didn't you? He didn't answer immediately. We passed a sign for Squamish, 40 kilometers. The rain started, light and coastal, the kind Vancouver is built on. Because I've seen your work, he said finally, and I thought if I was going to ask someone to look honestly at my family for a weekend, it should be someone who knew how to look at things honestly. I thought about the photograph on the deck, his profile and the mountains, the way he'd looked not like a man performing composure, but like a man who actually felt it, underneath everything. Okay, I said. Okay. I'll talk to your mother about the Kootenays project. I paused. And you should probably know, the photograph from the deck. The one I said I was going to use. Yes, I wasn't planning to use it anywhere. I know, I just wanted it. I know that too, he said. Outside the rain came down heavier over the Squamish estuary, and somewhere in the back seat, Pudding shifted and sighed. And the city waited ahead of us in the low November light. And I thought about what it meant to look at a thing honestly, and still not be sure, yet what you were seeing. I raised my camera anyway. That's the only way I know how to start.